play. Let's look down into the nitty-gritty of this. So we've got yoga, we've got breathing, we've got food we talked about, and we've got exercise. So where does this fit in? Well, breathing, let's talk a little bit about breathing. Breathing is where you probably know what breathing is. So you breathe in oxygen down into the lungs, and you breathe out basically CO2 out. So food that we eat, we've got an apple here in my pocket, if I can get it out. So food and water and the breathing, all three of these things are very important, of course. So the breathing brings the oxygen down into the lungs. But where does it go after it goes into the lungs? That's what we're going to look at. And then the oxygen goes into the blood, carried down into the cells, and there are billions of cells in the body that need to be nourished with oxygen, with food, and with water. Now, in yoga, yoga is really important because when this water and this food with the oxygen go into the cell creates energy. Okay, it's not a myth. So we'll look at how this energy is produced. And we as yogis doing yoga, when we really get into the process of focusing and controlling where the energy goes, we can transform or transmit that energy to places in the body. That's very important. We can go to the mind, we can go to the brain, we can go to the hands, the feet, the heart, the lungs, the liver. Okay? So let's take a look at what I'm talking about here. So oxygen comes into the cell, into the cells, the alveoli of the lungs, where the blood picks up the oxygen, and then the blood carries the oxygen to the cells. All right? So in the cells, here's a drawing of a cell, the cell membrane, the nucleus, the nucleolus, the endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi complex, the mitochondria, the cytoplasm, the vacuoles, and on and on. So there are a lot of different kinds of organelles. What we're interested in are the mitochondria. The mitochondria are said to be the powerhouses of the cell. It's within the mitochondria where the energy is produced. Now, how is the energy produced? Here is a rendition of what happens in the mitochondria. This is known as the Krebs cycle. And this is a very complicated mechanism, very complicated drawing here. Well, it's a very complicated mechanism too. It's a reaction. So I'm going to render this down into a very simple picture. So here we have a cell, the cytoplasm, and let's say that this is the mitochondrion, one mitochondrion. Within the mitochondrion is where the energy is going to be produced. So we talked about oxygen. Oxygen comes into the cell. Here's oxygen. So we breathe in the oxygen into the alveoli, carried by the blood into the cell. So it transfuses into the cell, is carried to the mitochondria. The food that we eat, any food that you eat is going to be broken down into a very simple carbohydrate called glucose, C6H12O6. It's got 6 atoms of carbon, 12 atoms of hydrogen, and 6 atoms of oxygen. C6H12O6, glucose. So glucose comes into the cell, Enzymes immediately attack the glucose. I like to use the word attack. The enzymes break it down. So this is where vitamins and enzymes come in very handy. So vitamins A through Z are what we call coenzymes. Vitamins are coenzymes. So the vitamins and the coenzymes, the enzymes break the glucose down into carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So these go separately into the mitochondria to be used to make the energy. Now, how does it make the energy? So they go into the carbon, the hydrogen, and oxygen go into the cell, and in the process, the oxygen comes in and takes out the excess hydrogen. So excess hydrogen is produced because the carbon and the oxygen are needed, mainly the carbon, to produce what we call ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And adenosine triphosphate, the ATP, is the packet of energy in the cell that when it breaks apart, it releases electrons. So electrons are the magic elixirs of respiration. So this whole thing is called cellular respiration. So the respiration that we do with the lungs is external respiration, and the cell is called cellular respiration, where the energy is produced. So the food that we eat, the oxygen that we breathe, and the water that we take in, so water, H2O, also comes in here and supplies oxygen and more hydrogen to produce the ATP. In the process of making ATP, the oxygen links onto the extra hydrogens that are byproducts and produces water. So this is why we breathe out more water than we drink in. And also in this process, carbon dioxide is produced as a byproduct. So food, glucose, water comes into the cell, oxygen comes into the cell. So here we have food, water, and oxygen, the three things we talked about. All these chemical reactions occur here in the Krebs cycle. ATP is produced, packets of energy. Water is produced as an expelled particle, and CO2 is produced as an expelled particle. So the CO2 and the water go into the blood, carried back to the lungs, back to the alveoli, and the alveoli releases the CO2 and the water back into the lungs, and the lungs breathe out the CO2. So, this energy that's produced in a cell can be used by directing the mind into the area where we want the energy to go. For example, if you are meditating and you feel like you need to have a hip healed, you can breathe that oxygen into the body, into the hip, into any part of the body. Allow that energy to be formed in that area and breathe out the byproducts, the CO2 and the water out of the breath. Breathe in the energy, the water, the food, the oxygen into the cell. Direct it with the mind. And as you're doing asana, as you're moving in the body, you can do the same thing. As you're moving the body from one pose to another, for example, using the mind to direct the energy into a part of the body. This is where concentration comes in.